Hey everyone, in today's video, I'll be going over what I believe is the next best mage build. I'm saying this because I've killed pretty much every boss in the game with this setup and I've had no difficulties at all. Now what makes it really special are the certain spells I'm using that have a huge impact on some of the more difficult enemies in the game. For example, Mikola. I can push right through her as if she was one of the starter bosses in the beginning. But anyways, let's actually dive into the build now and we'll start it off with those significant spells. So for our first one, we're going to be using Night Comet. It's pretty much the exact same thing as the regular Comet spell, but there are some noticeable differences. For example, you need 52 intelligence to cast Comet, whereas Night Comet only requires 38 levels. It also costs 2 mana less to cast Night Comet, which isn't that big of a deal, but you will notice a huge difference in terms of damage. Night Comet hitting much harder than the regular Comet spell. This is just because of the way I have the build set up using two particular staffs that really buff its damage. Now the last thing that makes this spell so much better is it's semi-invisible. What this means is when we're fighting bosses like Mikola or NPC invaders, they have the ability to dodge incoming spells and projectiles just as a regular player would, except this spell being semi-invisible makes it so they can't see it and won't dodge it as they normally do. Before I continue on with the rest of the build, I do want to give a big thanks to the sponsors of this video. Raid Shadow Legends, one of the most popular mobile games out there. And if you guys haven't heard of them, it's either one, you've been asleep for a couple of years, or this is your first time watching a gaming video. But not to worry, I'm going to tell you what they're all about. Choose from hundreds of champions, almost an endless selection, so you're bound to find some guys you're really going to love. Once you got your team together, it's time to make them more powerful, and you can do that by upgrading their gear and also leveling up their skills, which I think is absolutely amazing. Then you can head into the Doom Tower. This huge tower is actually a prison. The Arbiter fought a pack of really nasty bad guys a long time ago, but she wasn't strong enough to take them out for good. So instead, she locked them up in a massive super tower until she figured out how to deal with them. Well, it's also been a few thousand years or something, and there's still a Doom Tower, so I guess we know how that went. What's worse, now that Sephiroth is leaking back into the world, the Arbiter doesn't have enough power to keep the wards up, so the Doom Tower is slowly falling apart and it's up to us to get in there and knock some heads around before they get out. To climb to the top, you're going to need an army of champions. The regular Doom Tower floors tend to be pretty easy to deal with if you've just got a strong team, but the bosses are really tough and you need some serious specialists if you're going to beat them. You'll generally want ways to remove debuffs, and you'll also want some pretty high resistance. Lots of Doom Tower bosses ignore block debuffs, and they can do some really nasty stuff to your champions, like draining their turn meters or stripping their buffs. A couple of bosses need specific mechanics to beat them, like the Scarab King. He takes barely any damage unless you reduce his max HP, and if you attack him without a shield buff on, he'll wreck your entire team really fast. And there's a couple of things that really stand out for me in this game, one of them being the amount of detail they put into every champion. Also, this month Raid just released a giant new feature called Awakening and a brutal new dungeon, the Iron Twins Fortress. If you're good enough to take down the Iron Twins, you'll see a huge payoff. Being able to awaken your champions, this lets you choose a powerful blessing that can transform how they perform in battle. I love how awesome some of these blessings look, and there's so much variety, like you just never run out. This whole feature has added an entire new level of depth and strategy, and I've been having a ton of fun playing around and testing things out. But that's not the end of it either. Raid just released a superpower legendary version of everyone's favorite champion, the Death Knight. The whole Raid community has been waiting for this for a long time, and Ultimate Death Knight is literally everything we've wanted. He's poised, he's powerful, he's just perfect. That's the best way to describe it. And the best part is everyone can get him for free, just by logging in. All you have to do is log in, play Raid for 7 days between now and October 27th, and you'll get the Ultimate Death Knight added to your collection. Just like that, easy and simple. There's seriously never been a better time to get started. You can also use the code DKRises for a bunch of free items to instantly level up your new strongest champion all the way up to level 50 5-star Ascension. And if you haven't started playing Raid yet, click my link in the description down below or scan my QR code here on screen. You'll get unique bonuses worth $30. We're talking a free epic champion Tyrell, 200k silver, 1 energy refill, 1 XP boost, and 1 ancient shard so you can summon awesome champions as soon as you get in the game. These rewards are only going to be available for the next 30 days, so you better get moving. This pretty much just allows us to rapidly cast the spell without worrying about them jumping out of the way or closing the gap to kill us. On top of that, it also staggers them as well, which is really nice because, again, it just helps out with keeping them at a distance for a longer period of time before they can get close enough to get any attacks off. Since this spell has the feature to be charged up to do a more powerful attack, we can also throw on Godfrey's icon, which increases the damage of all charged attacks, magic included, by an extra 15%. So if you want to get off the most damage possible, just charge it up and let it rip. Then for our last spell, we're going to go with Night Shard. It's pretty much like Glintstone Pebble with the same effects as the Night Comet spell. Enemies can't see it and won't try to dodge out of the way. Night Shard is mainly going to be used against weaker enemies because it's basically 1/3 of the spell Night Comet. What I mean by this is it pretty much costs 1/3 of the mana Night Comet uses, and also does about 1/3 of the damage of Night Comet as well. So instead of wasting a ton of mana to kill regular enemies from a distance, you can just fire off a quick Night Shard spell to get rid of them fairly easily. Now for how these spells do a lot of damage is really simple. There's a weapon called the Staff of Loss, and what this does is increase the damage of invisibility sorceries by 30%. So that's a huge damage buff right there. If we have one of them, that's 30% increased damage on our night spells. But if we have two of them, one in each hand, the night spells damage now gets increased to 60% instead. Hard-hitting spells that bosses and NPCs won't dodge. What's not to love? I'm also going to be using the Magic Scorpion Charm to add an extra 12% increased damage to all of our magic attacks. So that kind of covers everything for the spells because honestly, you can always just add more as you go along, but those are the main two you'll want to have for the most damage possible. Now lastly for our weapons, I'm also going to throw on the Sword of Night and Flame. We can all agree that the special attack on this thing is absurdly good even after all the nerfs it's faced. So the way we can use this is really simple. If you don't want to spend any mana at all killing the weaker enemies, just basic attack them because it does have a good attack power rating, especially for a straight sword. Then for bosses or stronger enemies, just use a special attack on this thing and melt their health bar away. I'm also using the Shard of Alexander as my third talisman just to boost the damage of the special attack by an extra 15%. It's not needed, but if you are using the sword often, it will get its value with the extra damage. But if you don't plan on using the sword at all, no problem. You can equip the Graven Mask talisman to boost your spells damage by an extra 8% instead. So we're all covered up on the weapons for the build. Let's move on to the Flask of Wondrous Physic. The best tiers you'll want to use with this is the Magic Shrouding tier. This is going to boost all of our magic attacks by an extra 20% for 3 minutes. Plenty of time to deal with any enemy in the game with ease. Then the other tier, you actually have two options really. You can go with the Cerulean Hidden tier. That's going to give us infinite mana for 15 seconds. So this is going to be really good to use right before a boss fight, just so you don't have to worry about mana consumption when you're chain casting spells. Or you can go with the Intelligence Crystal Knot tier, which is going to increase our intelligence by 10 levels for 3 minutes as well. So this is just going to increase our damage by a bit since everything we're using scales off of intelligence. There's no right or wrong answer here, it all just comes down to preference. Before I go over the minimum stats required, let's take a better look at the armor you'll want to use. I found the Spellblade set to be pretty decent. It increases the special attack's damage on the Sword of Night and Flame by a total of 8%, 2% damage increase per piece of armor used from this set. Now the downside to it is light armor, so there's not a whole lot of protection to incoming attacks. To get around this, I just equipped the Dragon Crest Great Shield Talisman to increase our physical damage negation by an extra 15%. If you aren't going to use the Sword of Night and Flame, you can just equip some heavier armor for more protection, cause there's not a whole lot of weight to this build, mainly from how light our weapons are. Now lastly, we can go over the minimum stats required. You'll need at least 12 strength, 12 dex, 38 intelligence, and 24 faith to use all of the spells and weapons effectively. Afterwards, I'd recommend putting majority of your points into intelligence to increase your damage, and mind so you can cast more spells before running out of mana. Now before I end the video off with some more gameplay of the build, I do want to give a big thanks to the members of my channel for supporting me on my videos and the future ones to come. Thanks for watching everyone, and I hope I see you all in the next one.